my take on the topic of receptive ecumenism will be Eastern. We had a discussion earlier today that receptive ecumenism seems to be fitting well the ecclesiology of the churches, like the Catholic Church and the Eastern churches, which have a kind of exclusivist idea of identifying themselves with Uma Sancta. And I should also mention that it seems that the idea of receptive ecumenism fits well the Eastern Christian ecclesiology on the one hand, on the other hand, all those sensitivities that Eastern Christians have regarding the ecumenical movement. As probably most of you know, we, the Eastern Christians, are difficult partners in the ecumenical dialogues. We often complain, we often express our reservations, and this idea of the ideas that underpin receptive ecumenism seem to somehow to calm down Eastern Christians regarding different ecumenical initiatives. It is like a common belief, a sort of common wisdom that some churches, including Eastern Christians, hesitate to fully embrace, the ecumenical ethos and agenda. There are strong anti-ecumenical movements within those churches, and ecumenism sometimes is regarded as they put it in the traditional Eastern Christian terminology is like heresy or arch heresy, or the heresy of the heresies. This is, of course, a result of ignorance, of a complete ignorance among the Eastern Christians regarding their own ecumenical past. Something that I myself discovered quite unexpectedly, actually through my ecumenical engagements. Even though, patristics is my primarily field, I was quite surprised to realize that essentially the first Christian millennium was marked by a lot of ecumenical projects, huge ecumenical projects, and most of those projects were carried out in the Christian East. It's only in the second Christian millennium that somehow the initiative of promoting ecumenism passed from the East to the West. It had to do, of course, with the weakening of the Byzantine state, what we call Byzantine state, which was essentially the Eastern Roman Empire, with the growth of the authority and both political and ecclesial power in the West, in Rome. But this is a kind of a later development, and before the huge ecumenical undertakings of the West, there were some huge ecumenical undertakings of the East. As a matter of fact, a lot of things that we identify in the Christian East, we identify, with orthodoxy as a kind of identity of the Eastern Christianity, something that helps us to, to keep ourselves away from the West, and something that we are take pride of. Like this is ours. This is our orthodoxy. We keep it, as our treasure. But as a matter of fact, a lot of things that we are proud of as our Orthodox legacy had appeared in the first place as ecumenical projects, as ecumenical undertakings. Sometimes, when I go to theological libraries, and it happened especially in the past when they had, those paper catalogs, clumsy catalogs, and when I looked into the catalogs, into the sections of the catalogs, they sometimes presented the ecumenical councils in the larger branch of ecumenism, and I was always surprised. Well, don't people know the difference between the ecumenical councils and ecumenism, even though they have the same root, the two words, ecumenical council, ecumenici, synodos, and ecumenism? They are very different things. And now I understand that, as a matter of fact, there is a very intrinsic connection between, ecumenism and ecumenical councils, because ecumenical councils, as it appears to be, were actually ecumenical in the modern sense of ecumenism. And I'm going to very briefly demonstrate this. For example, the first ecumenical council, the Council of Nicaea, addressed a church division, a division within the church that happened first in Egypt and then spread to other parts of the church. And effectively, the first ecumenical council tried to bridge the two parties in Egypt, the so-called Arian party and the party connected with the name of Athanasius. And that was the purpose of Constantine, the vision of Constantine, who supported this council exactly to bridge this gap that emerged in Egypt. The Second Ecumenical Council in 381 in Constantinople was also ecumenical in the sense that it tried to bridge the old Nicene party with the non-Nicene party. Essentially, the majority of the church during the first, the decades following the Nicaea, that objected the term ousia in any ecclesial definition, in any creed. People objected the Council of Nicaea. Most hierarchs and theologians, in the middle of the 4th century, objected the Council of Nicaea, not just because they, were Arians, as Athanasius presented them, but they were unhappy about this peculiar and stretched term homoousios and any term related to ousia. And they had their own sensitivities. And essentially, if we take the Second Ecumenical Council, we see how the Second Ecumenical Council was very cautious to avoid any terminology of the First Ecumenical Council which has relation to ousia, well, except homoousios, which it confirmed. So the Second Ecumenical Council had ecumenical sensitivities about the groups within the church that could not digest the Council of Nicaea. And it was essentially an ecumenical enterprise, ecumenical not only in the sense of being pan-imperial, but also in the sense of bridging gaps, bridging schisms that emerged in the church. Probably the Third Ecumenical Council in Ephesus was the least ecumenical, I would say, and it went in line with the Second Ephesian Council in 449, the so-called Robert Council. Well, at least from the Chalcedonian perspective, it was Robert Council. It was the least ecumenical because it promoted the interests of only one group in the church, which was the Alexandrian group. The Council of Chalcedon that followed 20 years after the First Ephesian Council was truly ecumenical in the sense that it again tried to bridge the gap, particularly the gap between the Eastern theology and the Western theology. That's why they accommodated the language of Pope Leo. So we deal with another ecumenical council in double sense, in the sense of being pan-imperial and in the sense of bridging gaps between different traditions. The most ecumenical council, in the sense of modern ecumenism, for me, is the Fifth Ecumenical Council, which confirmed the project of Neo-Chalcedonianism, the project that again tried to build another bridge between the language of Chalcedon and the language of Cyril of Alexandria. It was an enormous ecumenical project, which was undertaken by Emperor Justinian. This ecumenical project was not just theological, though it was theological primarily. Of course, it developed a new language, which was a kind of a Christological Esperanto that embraced, included different elements from the language of Cyril of Alexandria, of Chalcedon, and so forth. But it was a huge political project, which was essentially a feature of all ecumenical undertakings in the first millennium. They were not just, all those ecumenical undertakings were not just, ecclesial or theological, they were also political, because the ecumenical rationale of many theological projects were to preserve the integrity, the unity of the empire. It was crucially essential for the church and for the state, for the Roman Empire, to preserve some kind of integrity, and most ecumenical projects were directed at this. So Neo-Chalcedonianism was another huge ecumenical project undertaken by Emperor Justinian, who was moved by a bunch of reasons, including rationales, including the political reasons, and which was forced somehow upon the church, and the church eventually accepted it as an ecumenical project. Now we in the East take great pride, in Justinian, in the ecumenical councils, and at the same time we reject ecumenism. And this is a very intrinsic, very essential contradiction in terms. It's like almost schizophrenic. We oppose ecumenism per se as an idea, and we do this in the name of the things, of the projects, of the theological concepts that in the first place were ecumenical. I believe we can also learn a lot from the ecumenical undertakings of the first millennium that happened in the Christian East for modern ecumenism. And as a matter of fact, there are many parallels that I was very surprised to identify. Like, for instance, the idea of the ecumenical dialogue. It did not emerge in the 20th century during the ecumenical era. Probably the first instance of an extensive ecumenical dialogue was the one which was initiated again by Justinian in the 530s, when he invited to the capital two antagonistic groups, the Severans, the adversaries of the Chalcedon, led by the former patriarch of Antioch, Severus, and by the Chalcedonians, that included such prominent figures as Leontius of Byzantium. So those two groups, which were hostile to each other, in the if you want, in the sense of this kind of Reformation, counter-Reformation thing, in Europe, which really hated each other, and they came to Constantinople. They sat together at the same table, and they tried to discuss things and to get to identify common grounds, theological grounds. This was very similar to what we try to do in the framework of the ecumenical dialogues nowadays. And it became a basis of the Neo-Chalcedonian project that did not work in the 6th century or in the 7th century. And that is another thing, that even though the ecumenical councils were ecumenical in the modern sense of the word, they were disastrous ecumenical. They didn't bring unity, the desired unity, as they intended to bring. And now when we complain about the failures of ecumenism nowadays, they have nothing to do. They are nothing in comparison with the epic failures of the ecumenical projects of the past. And still people didn't give up. That is the kind of an amazing thing, that the early ecumenists, people like Justinian, or people like Maximus, for instance, who were ecumenists, I believe, they didn't even hope to see the results of the ecumenical enterprises during their lifetime, and still they hoped eschatologically. They saw ecumenism in eschatological terms. Maximus died in exile, forgotten and forbidden to write and to speak, and still he had hope. They tried to do their best in the past to do ecumenism. They failed, but nowadays, sometimes we quite surprisingly see amazing fruits of those ecumenical undertakings. If you take, for instance, again, this Neo-Chalcedonian project, which was so much popular in the 6th and the 7th century, which eventually failed at that time, but it surprisingly reemerged nowadays, because exactly the ecumenical language of Neo-Chalcedonianism, as it was elaborated upon in the 6th century, was used as the lingua franca of the common statements between the Oriental and Byzantine churches in 1989 and 1990. Effectively, the documents that were signed by the Orientals and the Byzantines just 30 years ago, they used the Neo-Chalcedonian language. They utilized this language that had failed in the past and now has worked now. So it's a kind of, it's a fulfillment of this eschatological vision, ecumenical vision of the Byzantines that comes to fruition nowadays. Another parallel that I found amazing, and which is followed by the modern ecumenical enterprises is the pattern of elaborating upon and dissemination of ecumenical decisions, the so-called convergence documents, which is a very popular genre of documents in the modern ecumenical movement, of course. And at the same time, it's not new. We find a lot of examples of convergence documents in the Byzantine past. I would credit a very controversial figure, which we usually despise in the 4th century, Emperor Constans II, the son of Constantine, who is believed to be, the promoter of Arianism. And I should credit him for an invention of, the models of ecumenism, which are still applicable in our times. Well, Constans II, contrary to popular beliefs nowadays, was not an Arian. He was an ecumenist in the sense that he wanted a rapprochement between different groups. Well, he probably misjudged some of those groups, and he believed that Athanasius of Alexandria, whom he really hated and was hated by Athanasius, he was a troublemaker. Well, probably that was true. Athanasius was a troublemaker. He was not very much ecumenical. And Constans tried to, to bridge somehow this gap between Athanasius, this Nicene group, rather small Nicene group, and the non-Nicene majority in his time. What he did, he introduced a way of dealing with these theological issues. Like, for instance, he introduced the method when first he consulted experts in theology, people like Basil of Ancyra, for instance, a prominent theologian in his time. Then he brought those ideas that he harvested from the groups of experts to larger discussions, to small councils, local councils. Then after these local councils approved the convergence texts drafted by the theologians, he brought those texts to wider councils, to the ecumenical councils, and he actually attempted to convene some ecumenical councils, like, for instance, the Council of Serdica, then the councils of Rimini and Seleucia, which were like huge pan-ecclesial gatherings. It resembles me exactly the way how the World Council of Churches works nowadays. When through the Faith and Order commissions, small groups of experts functioning under the umbrella of the Faith and Order, those groups come together, and myself, I participated in a number of those meetings. They were very fruitful discussions when we tried to to draft new texts, new concepts, and to elaborate on new languages. Then those documents were discussed in smaller groups, like in the Central Committee, meetings, and then brought to the General Assemblies of the World Council of Churches. If you take this last document on the ecclesiology, on the nature and purpose of the church, which was discussed in Porto Alegre in 2006, this document had exactly all those stages of evolution that the documents, the creeds in the 4th century under the auspice of Constans II. So essentially, he invented a new pattern, a new model of ecumenical discussions that are applicable nowadays. Well, I hope it is not an overstretch what I'm talking, but I was really surprised, to realize, to identify those common elements between the Byzantine ecumenism and our days. Well, I hope that these parallels, whether they are imaginary or real, could be a good a subject for discussions in the framework of the receptive ecumenism, because that's how we will proceed. We cannot avoid this kind of drawing these parallels and having these kind of discussions if we want to engage at least Eastern Christians and Catholic Church as well, which is also valuing a lot these kind of parallels and these kind of precedents. So that is my kind of suggestion for as a project for further discussions. Well, thank you again for inviting me to talk here, to present these ideas, and I hope that they may help.